Good evening. Welcome everyone to our webinar 4 as part of a series of webinars and symposiums that the Department of English has been organizing for a month. Today it's a pleasure to have among us Professor Ipshita Chanda from Hyderabad, India, with her paper on translation, untranslatability, and the ethics of translation, with a focus on Kazi Nazrul Islam and his poem Bidrohi. Before we start our session, I would like to request the chair of the department, Professor Dr. Nazrul Nasreen, to offer a welcome address. Professor Nazrul Nasreen.
Thank you, sir. A very good evening to all of you who are present here today. It's a privilege for me to be here with you and to get the opportunity of welcoming our honorable guest from India, Professor Dr. Ipshita Chanda, and also the other scholars and well-wishers who are present here today to today's webinar. I hope, like the other webinars that we have arranged already in the last month, this webinar is also going to be a successful one, a webinar in which we all are going to know a lot about translating the challenges that a translator faces and how to overcome those. I welcome you all once again to today's webinar, and I wish the webinar a success. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nazrul Nasreen. Now, before we start the session, let me take the privilege of introducing Professor Ipshita Chanda, who many of us know and are familiar with. Professor Ipshita Chanda is a professor of comparative literature in the School of Literary Studies, English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad, India. She has a teaching experience of 27 years at institutions of national repute like Jadavpur University, Kolkata, and Foreign Languages University, English and Foreign Languages Universities, Hyderabad. She has also been principal investigator in various research projects funded by UGC and Jadavpur University. She has worked in theory of literature and comparative approaches to Indian language and literatures, and served as ICCR Chair Professor of Indian Culture at Georgetown University, Washington, D.C. in the year 2013-14. Her areas of interests include theory of literature, comparative studies, Indian literature. And she has published profusely. For example, we may name some books like Packaging Freedom, Feminism and Popular Culture, Tracing the Cherry as a Genre, Reception of the Received, German Romanticism, Rabindranath, and Surya Kantripati. She has edited a number of volumes, including Palaver, Proceedings of the Forum for Scholars of African Studies in Jadavpur University, Locating Cultural Change, Theory, Methods, Process, Shaping the Discourse, Women's Writings in Bengali Periodicals, 1864 to 1947. And she is a translator. She translated books including Mahashweta Devi's Bitter Soil and Shatinash Bhaduri's Dhorai Chorit Manas. So today it's a privilege to welcome Professor Ipshita Chanda to offer her speech on translation with a focus on Kazi Nazrul Islam and his poem Bidrohi. Professor Ipshita Chanda, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Masroor. The screen seems to be mine, so I'll just take it. First and foremost, let me express my deep gratitude to be given this privilege I'm very grateful to my old friend and colleague, Professor Masroor, who has been engaging with us academically for a very long time now. And this is a project that has been undertaken by the Kazi Nazrul University at Asansol in West Bengal, India. And I had the privilege of being engaged with them as what you call a consultant. And so most of the, I mean, in fact, the translation is yet to be published. They're translating Ognibina from Bangla into English and other Indian languages, in fact, Nepali as well. That is what they've started with. But they have a larger plan of continuing in other Indian languages, which I think is a very important thing because Nazrul is one poet who we need now more than before, I think. And for obvious reasons, one poet who we are not turning to as much as we should be. So in the context of all these movements against discrimination across the world, and it's, I mean, something that we might reflect on together, that these movements sort of come and go. Just a few months ago, Black Lives Matter was something that took up space on our screens because now we are connected to the world through our screens. Then in India, there were several incidents of violence against very young women, caste violence and gender violence, and I think class violence taken together. So one after the other, they come and they seem to just, other people take screen space. They dissolve. At the moment, across the world, I think the most unfortunate thing that we see is the phobias against difference, which are very difficult to live with, but we are living with them nevertheless. And at the same time, we have this very dubiously named social distancing, which is advocated to combat a pandemic that spreads through close contact between people. Now, it is in this situation that I propose translation as a practice and philosophy to face the world that we have created. We have made this world in which we are being forced to live now. And it will be very helpful if I can switch between Bangla and English, because the whole point is actually the difficulty of translating this into English. And our head madam said that we will get to know a lot about translating. Ma'am, I'm sorry, I think we will get to know more about what cannot be translated and what ought not to be translated, such that we are face to face with difference. Because if we are unable to negotiate difference, if we are unable to live with difference, then this is the world that we are living in which there is extreme violent intolerance towards difference. So I'll go straight away to an extract from Nazrul, which is not Bidrohi actually. Bidrohi will come in later actually in relation to untranslatability. But the idea of untranslatability, the idea of difference, the idea of incommensurability, and how we negotiate this incommensurability and this difference through the desire for translation, the willingness to translate, which is actually the willingness to reach across difference, to try to look at the other as a subject and not as an object, and to connect with the other, to open ourselves to difference. I think Nazrul's work and life and philosophy are, these ideas are inherent in Nazrul's work and life and philosophy. So, okay, so this is color coded because those are the areas that I would like to focus on. বাংলাটা পড়ছি না, আপনারা পড়তে পাচ্ছেন বাংলাটা, but I will be focusing mainly on the different colors because they have different things to say. To start with, this phrase in the Bangla, which is guli maro. The name of the essay is Kala Admi ke Guli Mara. And as you can see, it's coded in different colors because I would like to talk about each of these words separately. We'll start with Guli Mara because that is the thrust of the piece. And as you know, as many of us Bangla speakers are aware, Guli Mara, that is firing at, has a double meaning. There is also the, there is also the inherent meaning in the colloquial usage, what we call cholti bhasha, but cholit. In that register, when we say guli maro, what we imply is neglect, contempt, something that can easily be dispensed with. So here is where the problem of immediately incommensurability and untranslatability arises. It is very easy to translate guli maro into fire at, which is what I've done here. The point is that you cannot get both the senses across. Eje kala admi ke guli mara, firing at the black man, not only firing to kill him, but as the extract shows, tells about an incident. And let me read a little so it will be clear what exactly Nazrul means when he uses guli mara in both senses. Now that comes across to the Bengali speaker. The Bengali speaker can convey that to the speaker of English, but not using that one single phrase, because the literal translation in English is inadequate to cover the scope of the meaning of that phrase used there, a guli mara. And I will have occasion to talk about the difficulty of conveying meaning because of incommensurability between languages, using certain concepts proposed by Syed Said, an Indian philosopher. So if I could read, now when he's talking about guli mara, he's talking about literally firing and showing contempt for the black man, for his humanity simultaneously. So when you fire at a dog, there is still some semblance of fear. What if the dog suddenly turns around and sinks his teeth into us? But when it comes to firing at us black men, we are still with one sense, that is literally firing. Now the passage changes over to the second sense, which it is impossible to convey through a literal translation. When it comes to firing at us black men, our white lords have no such hesitation because they know that we are lower than animals. কেননা তাহারা জানে যে আমরা পশুর চেয়েও অধম। আমাদের গুলি মারলে, লিটারালি গুলি মারলে এবং পাত্তা না দিলে একত্রে কোনো অসুবিধা নেই। Because they know that we are lower than animals. Once, and this, then he describes what he means when he says that we are lower than animals. Once a white man's bullet killed one of our kind. The Sahib asked who was killed. Someone informed him, a poor rural man, Hujur. The Sahib set his legs wide apart and said without a hint of discomposure, oh, I had thought it was a human being. The second reason why I'm reading this is the main thrust of my thinking about translation, which is that South Asian languages, Bangla certainly one of them, share a common structure of plurality. And the definition of plurality comes from Lakshman Khubchandani, who says that as a socio-linguistic area, he's only talking about India, but I am extending it because South Asia, across the borders of South Asia, there are languages that are spoken internationally, Bangla being one of them. And the way in which we conceptualize, I mean, this is a side effect of things, but the way in which we conceptualize South Asia geographically, I think, is grossly wrong. If it is possible to look at it socio-linguistically and look at the areas of commonality, we will understand that one of the things that categorizes our languages is plurality. And translation across plural languages is different and far easier than translation from one of these languages into a quote-unquote European language, English most certainly. So the concept of plurality is something which underlies this work of translation. That, I mean, one of the things that one can apply to the idea, I mean, to the translation of Nazrul, which is, I mean, it does not bear saying that it is extremely difficult to do, primarily because Nazrul actually exploits that plurality of language in every way, not only in vocabulary, in syntax, in the structure of feeling from which the language arises, and in tone. So, therefore, in order to understand the idea of linguistic plurality, we are using the work of Lakshman Khubchandani, who says that the traditional view of language as an autonomous system with defined boundaries, that we can say that this is Bangla, this is a standard Bangla, which we know is not the case. There is no single Bangla. And I would like to argue that there is no standard Bangla either. That because it's a living language, it is characterized by what Khubchandani calls organic plurality, which is vagueness, ambiguity, variability, and fuzziness. There is no strict definition of Bangla which encompasses all the speakers of Bangla. It is very easy to understand that the moment you move from, for example, from Calcutta to, let us say, Murshidabad. I'm not saying if you move from Calcutta to Dhaka, because that is a political issue which rests at the heart of Bangla as we know it today. And even if we try to erase that history, it still remains with us. We do not know the number of words that come from Persian or Arabic origin that are within what we call standard, sort of a Hindu Bangla. Okay. So if we go back, that is exactly what I'd like to speak about now, that Guli Mara is difficult to translate because of the double intention there. What would be called the double entendre in French. That is there are two meanings there, the double intention. And you can only translate literally into English. So one of the meanings gets lost. In this passage, at least, Nazrul has made up for that. He has said certain things about what he means, that Guli Mara is not only literally firing, but it is also being contemptuous of. The words convey that. But then there is also Kala Admi, which many Bengalis will tell you is not Bangla. It's not Bangla because it is, they will tell you it is Hindi. Now it is common to both Hindi and Bangla. And the fact that Nazrul uses this different register, okay, words which come from what we understand as Hindustani. We don't call it Hindustani anymore. And just like Bangla, it also has a vast range of registers and combinations with other languages, what I'm calling a plural language. What Khubchandani says, the fuzziness of the boundaries between language, the false idea that languages are self-contained and autonomous. They are not, because they are spoken by human beings, and human beings speak with other human beings. And the condition that we have in a country like India, or in a state like West Bengal, is that people from many languages coexist together. So how will you translate Kala Admi? Into any Indian language, it is easy to translate and show the difference, show that there are two languages within this one statement. But in English, that is untranslatable. If you translate it into black man, then you lose the contact between Bangla and Hindustani, which is something that Nazrul preserves in his work. He could have said Kalo Manush, which is quote unquote Shuddho Bangla, which simply means Bangla which is sanitized of all the other languages, primarily the influence of Persian and Arabic. So this will bring us to the parochialism that results from not accepting the plurality of our languages. And that is what I'm saying is the difficulty that we have in tolerating difference, the difficulty and the antagonism that we have towards difference. And I'm sorry to be using very strong words, but we are living, especially in India, we are living in a time in which the violence is so strong, the violence of discrimination is so strong that it is impossible to use, civilized sort of understatements. So And I mean, one of the things that we've indicated is that this is not a violence that is contemporary. It is a historical violence against the violence of intolerance, against difference. And in this slide, we have an instance which many of you, I'm sure, know. And it's perhaps a shameful reality that more of Bangla speakers in Bangladesh would know about this controversy than Bangla speakers in India. But it is the same language that they speak, and they claim the history equally on both sides. So this is Nazrul's translation of, as you can see, Kandari Hushiyar. And again, if it's coded because Nazrul uses the word khun as in blood. Now in Sanskritized Bangla, that is Rokto. But here again, I'd like you to see, which of course these are lines which are extremely familiar to Bangla speakers. He uses khun to rhyme with, as a source of rhyming. He just doesn't use it for the heck of it. Huh? And so কান্ডারি তব সম্মুখে ওই পলাশির প্রান্তর বাঙালির খুনে রক্তে, he could have easily said, but বাঙালির খুনে লাল হলো যেথা ক্লাইভের খঞ্জর. I find this also a very delectable phrase. As much as বাঙালির খুন, Bangali and khun are not so unusual together. But Clive er Khonjor, and Khonjor is a Sanskrit word, and Clive, of course, is Clive. So these are the little games that a poet is able to play with the language. A poet in whose consciousness plurality is so deeply embedded. As you can see in the next few lines. Again, ওই গঙ্গায় ডুবিয়াছে হায় ভারতের দিবাকর, উদিবে সে রবি আমাদেরই খুনে রাঙিয়া পুনর্বার, হিন্দু না ওরা মুসলিম ওই জিজ্ঞাসে কোন জন, কান্ডারি বলো ডুবিছে মানুষ সন্তান মোর মার. So it is who cares whether they are Hindu or Muslim? They are sons of Mother India. And they are my mother. So they are my brothers who are being killed. And the word Robi, of course, has special resonance in Bengali, which is untranslatable. The irony is that Rabindranath actually took issue with Nazrul for using this word khun in a quote-unquote Bengali poem. So there are 2 points that I would like to make here in keeping with what I'm proposing. One, that plurality, which is inherent in our languages, has always been contested by majoritarianism, has always been contested by fundamentalism and by parochialism. Nazrul was, of course, generous enough to literally pardon Rabindranath for making such a great to-do about the use of the word khun. The irony is the word khun is there again, double meaning in Bengali. Nazrul is using it here as blood, for which, because there is a Sanskrit synonym, Rabindranath took issue with him. we use the word khoon for murder without thinking too much about anything, right? So, I mean, one can see the depth to which difference is resisted. Rabindranath talks about how there is an influence, I think in Shabda Tattva, in the introduction to Shabda Tattva, he talks about the influence of European words and how the register in which literature is written should be the register in which people talk. At the time he is writing, almost 30% of the actually 50% at the time he's writing. This is undivided Bengal. So 50% of the population uses the word khoon to refer to blood, uses the word pani to refer to water. So what popular language is he talking about? And what is his problem? That is the whole point. And this is how Nazrul actually replies. He says, I use the word khoon in my poetry not to give a Musalmani or a Bolsheviki color to it. There is also, of course, Nazrul's relation with the Communist Party. Perhaps the poet meaning Rabindranath. And I like the way he says the Sanskrit grammarians hiding behind him are speaking through him. It is true that, there is a huge controversy, Shonibarer Chithi, Shajanikanta Mukhopadhyay, they all talk about the difficulty, or rather not the difficulty, they mock Nazrul for using these words, which according to them are not standard Bengali. And Nazrul directly addresses this problem. Not only khoon, I have used many other colloquial Arabi Farsi words in my writing. From my side, I have an explanation for this. I think the world literature goddess has a Musalmani style. Before the idea of world literature, the spurious idea of world literature. And again, it is ironical that Rabindranath himself has written an essay on world literature, saying that if we partition their literature and our literature, tader khet, amader khet, as if there is a line between that is your field and this is my field, and my literature stops here and your literature starts there. My language is pure, your language is impure because you use words. Rabindranath himself has written these words in Vishwa Sahitya. And I read this as a reference to that. I read this as Nazrul's subtle critique of precisely that, I would say hypocritical position, which is enunciated there in Vishwa Sahitya, but not applied to Vishwa Sahitya at all. In fact, not applied to Bangla Sahitya for that matter. So what Nazrul says is, I think that the world literature goddess has a Musalmani style. And I'm not aware that this style of hers has decreased her beauty and appeal in any way. And so, half of her jewel box is full of Musalmani ornaments. In Nazrul's work, this openness to difference, this acknowledgement, I won't say, this living of plurality, which is the reality in which our cultures are put. The reality, the context of our cultures is that. So he says, and this is for Indians, for me, this is a comment on the contemporary. Pandit Malviya may not agree with this, but I do not expect Rabindranath and Abanindranath to disagree. Unfortunately, both Rabindranath certainly was guilty of disagreeing with this acceptance of plurality, with this tolerance. Though Rabindranath has spoken about the dangers of majoritarian nationalism, the dangers of militant nationalism. But it is in these small things, especially when they are related to literature. And if you notice the title of this essay, Boror Priti Balir Bandh, You cannot depend upon the love and support of a great man. So, as far as poets go, Rabindranath is supposed to be the greater poet. And I mean, there is no need to dispute or argue or even discuss that. But Nazrul's fame has not gone beyond South Asia, I think, because of this inherent plurality in his work. It is so difficult to translate in order to preserve this plurality. And that, I think, should be the focus of all of us who are involved in translating not only Nazrul, but between any of our Indian languages, most certainly Bangla. Now, the fact that it has been difficult to translate, I take to a great extent as a tribute to Nazrul, because of the poet's deft weaving of the common symbols and images from the plural culture shared across the subcontinent. It is also a marker of his rebellion against the oppression of monolinguality and monoculturalism, with which India is dangerously being identified today. Translating Nazrul's poetry gives us the opportunity to reaffirm our faith in that plurality, which was sought to be divided by the two-nation theory, claiming that two cultures that inhabited the subcontinent were necessarily incommensurable with each other. In actual fact, Nazrul's life and work were robust contradictions of this theory. His poetry combined the idiom, tradition, genres, and rhythms of the two apparently opposed cultures, so-called Hinduism and Islam. I'm saying so-called because the word Hinduism dates from the 19th century. The word Hindu is, as you know, a much older reference to the people who live around or on the banks of the Sindhu. Now, Persian does not have the sir sound, apparently. So it is the Persians who came to the banks of the Indus, who named the land as Hindu. The reference or the connection of the word Hindu to religion comes after the standardization of religion and the strict divisions of religion that were instituted during the colonial times. So, the traditions, genres, and rhythms of the two apparently opposed cultures in which his language identity and religious identity were located. Thus, the single focus on an identity and its politicization for the gains of the powerful, which is what we see now, are also brought to focus in Nazrul's poetry, as I have tried to demonstrate. He is equally critical of the fundamentalism and superstition of the two supposedly opposed cultures, showing the roots of a binary opposition as harmful to the plurality of human existence. So again, if we go back to the idea of plurality, the strict distinction between self and other actually belies the reaching out of one culture, one person, one civilization, one world to the other. And we cannot argue that this does not happen. Rather, If we argue that we cannot reach the other, if we argue that there is a strict boundary between cultures, that there is a strict boundary between languages, then we create a situation in which we are living now. So, with that preface, introducing the idea of incommensurability, I think, I mean, in the last few minutes that I have, I'd like to talk about ethics. Ethics in two ways. One, how do we engage with the other? Do we or do we not acknowledge the other? If we do not acknowledge the other, Gandhi is supposed to have said, taken from the tenets of Christianity, that an eye for an eye will leave the whole world blind. And we very well know that the whole world is not like us. That difference is one of the conditions of our existence. So the question of not addressing difference, or the address of intolerance, of contempt, guli mara literally, that is going to leave the whole world blind, as we can see. So the ethics of relating to the other despite incommensurability, that is the basic thing that we need in the situation in which we find ourselves now. And the ethics of translation, which should reflect this ethics of engaging with the other. Because translation is a willing engagement with the other. Nobody is forcing me to translate. I am translating because I want to engage with difference, because I want to bring difference close to what is familiar, because I want a conversation with difference. And there, untranslatability is the preservation of difference. When I see a word from another language, that automatically brings the other into focus. Otherwise, through translation, it is quite possible to swallow the other, to take the other, to sort of ingest the other, to pose the other in my own terms. And I think that is unethical in translation. That is the reason why I think that kala admi is untranslatable in a Bangla sentence. It conveys the plurality of Bangla as a language. If I translate kala admi into black man, it is perfectly correct. There is nothing wrong with it. It is unethical, because the English reader will then never find out that both of these are possible within Bangla, because that is the characteristic of Bangla as a language. And it is from that position that I find Rabindranath's disavowal of Nazrul's use of the word khun and many other such words, as Nazrul has pointed out, I find that gravely objectionable, because that too undercuts the plurality and the reality of the language of Bangla. So I would like to just focus at the end on these few bits that are highlighted, that are colored, that you cannot directly seek equivalence, because these words convey something specific in the language from which they come. The word khun has a specific meaning. It is used in Bangla as murder. So these are two different meanings. Okay. And both are crucial for the translator. So it will not be a matter of simple isolated correspondence, but a matter of theoretical mediation. He says theoretical, I am saying ethical mediation. It is an ethical choice for me to keep Kala Admi because I want to hint at the plurality. So it cannot be a simple isolated correspondence, just translating literally. So translation is a domain in which sensitivity to the incommensurability arising from differences of situatedness or embodiment in the world is of enormous importance. And it is our task, I think, to develop the discursive tools to engage with them. And finally, Bidrohi. Again, if we look at, one of the things, of course, is that the rhythm is not regular. I'm not talking too much about that. That is visible here. That the irregular rhythm that characterizes Bidrohi, I did not realize until I had started to translate it, because it is so rhythmic. But the whole idea is to convey the revolt in the lack of, if not the lack of rhythm, but in the change of rhythm. So the focus of that was, the focus of the translation was attempt to keep the same rhyme scheme. So if you look at it, you will find that the rhyme scheme remains. Where end rhymes are there, there are end rhymes, like shoinik and goirik, so vow and bow. So in that sense, one has tried to keep that rhythm. But what is impossible to do is to convey, like I said, the plurality. For example, here, Ami pinak panir domoru trishul dharmo rajer dondo. Now here, pinak pani has direct references to the Hindu quote unquote pantheon. So anyone who knows an Indian language, be it Bangla, be it Hindi, be it anything else, except the languages of the Northeast, anyone who knows an Indian language will immediately get this reference. Pinak Pani is another name for Shiva. Okay. But the word Shiva is not mentioned anywhere. Then you have Dharmorajer Dondo. Dharmoraj is Yama, the god of death. But Yama is not mentioned anywhere. So the question is, and then again you have Ami Chakro, Mahashankho, Ami Pranabanath Prachando. So Chakro and Mahashankho again are references to Vishnu, to Krishna to be precise. So here you have the Trinity, like you have everybody. But none of their commonly known names are mentioned. Not only does this convey the extent to which Nazrul was familiar with the entire repertoire of signification of quote unquote Hindu culture or religion, whatever you want to say. We are aware that some of the most, in fact, practically all of the most touching Shama Shungit that there are have been written by Nazrul. So that residue in his mind, in his work, is untranslatable, because the language into which we are translating, English, is single. It is not plural. Or at least we do not know how to use those plural resources that English may be having. If you translate this into any Indian language, you will have the advantage of not needing to translate anything at all. Here, if, as you notice, the way in which one has tried to address that problem is to take the action rather than the name. So just as the original does not mention Shiva or Yama or Krishna by name, but by their actions or what they have, how they are recognized. So it is the signification that has been translated here, not the names, not the nominal terms, because there are no nominal terms here. There are no names here. There are only signs. And this is one, you see here the literal translation has occurred. No sense has gone across. The English reader has no idea who is the ringing trident of destruction, what the death dealer means. The English reader has no idea. And this is just, I mean, I've just highlighted simply plurality. I've talked a lot about untranslatability, as you know. But here, this is, again, you have Orpheus, you have Krishna, and then you have Dozak. So the simple point that I'm making is that it's impossible to translate Nazrul. It's unethical to translate Nazrul without bringing this incommensurability, this difference into the translation, because that is what we are conveying to the reader. That here is a poet who is able to hold the plurality in his work, which is why he is so important to us. Now, we often, and I will conclude with this, that we often think that, untranslatability is a failure. Untranslatability is an imposition. The fact is that untranslatability is a way of conveying difference. And since the basic idea of translation is to convey difference, to leave what is different between cultures as untranslatable is the ethical move. Now again, to quote from Said, as the tendency often is to deny the notion of incommensurability as incoherent, or assert that it is an absolute obstacle which rules out mutual intelligibility. That is the point that I have tried to address in what I have said, that mutual intelligibility, our understanding each other, includes the fact that we are different and there is something that may not be conveyable, something that may not be translatable, and unfortunately something that may not be comprehensible to others as well. So we must look at incommensurability not as an insurmountable problem, but as a feature of trans-discursive encounters. This is why I think the idea of sociolinguistic plurality is so important in any study of literature and language in our context and in our location. Usually we talk about India, but today I am saying South Asia because I have the privilege of speaking to fellow South Asians. So it is a feature of trans-discursive encounters which must be taken into account if we wish to facilitate a mutual intelligibility as a means of conflict resolution and generally as a step towards generating greater understanding and tolerance. In other words, what I'm talking about is an alertness to areas of incommensurability so as to bring into play the necessary strategies to surmount it. And I've tried to use the translation of Bidrohi in order to present some of these strategies to surmount untranslatability. One of them being the inclusion of untranslatability in the translated text. So to end, I would like to imagine that we are stumbling along a pathway which will lead to a much needed understanding of our present location. This, I think, is the ethical project that we have in translation. This stems from the belief that the conversations that make up the literary field in which translation becomes possible due to contact between cultures is part of, to quote Merleau-Ponty, a universe in which we are not imprisoned as if behind insurmountable barriers, but to which we are opened. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ipshita Chanda, for its exciting talk on translation and plurality that translation involves and the ethics of translation. Yes, we are aware that translation of a literary text involves more than linguistic transaction. It involves importation of literary, linguistic, and cultural mores, and hence it initiates intercultural and interhuman negotiation and enrichment. Therefore, untranslatability presents a curious sight to inquire that scope of such possibilities. Professor Chanda concentrated on translating the plurality of language or multiple connotations, elusive and etymological meanings of a word. For example, kun. And she elaborated why she left kun untranslated in translation. On the other hand, she preferred translating Pinak Panit Dumru Trishul in Bidrohi into the ringing trident of destruction in her bid to foreground the significance of the action instead of the name that also the poet initiated. And in this way to make the meaning rich, the English-speaking reader. She contends that while plurality is an element that leaves a poet difficult to translate and thus reach a planetary readership, it is the same element that leaves a poet rebellious, able to break new grounds and offer spaces of negotiation between ethnic and religious diversities and conflict. Another important issue in translation is ethics, that is the responsibility that self assumes in order to relate to other and attempt to transcend or translate incommensurability. Professor Ipshita contends that translation is a willing engagement, a willing dialogue with the other. Therefore, the ethics of translation is not to invade the other, rather to initiate dialogue and enhance mutual intelligibility. So thank you for such an exciting presentation. And also, I should say, very accessible presentation, though the topics were relatively difficult to handle. We have a certain number of questions that we find in our chat box. One from Professor Fakhrul Alam. So since Professor Fakhrul Alam is with us, so we may want to invite him to make comment or present an observation. Yes, Professor Fakhrul Alam, are you there? I'm not sure if he's there still. Okay, now what Professor Alam wrote is that thought-provoking for sure, provocative too, and a learning experience as well. Thanks to Professor Chanda and Mashur for inviting me to the presentation.
There's no question there.
Yes, Professor Fakhrul Alam is not there. Okay. There were some questions. Let us take these questions first, and we will also open the floor for everyone to make questions, observations. It is a question from Rindon Kundu. I think, are you here, Rindon Kundu? If you want, you can make the question. I mean, if you're present there.
That's not a question either, Mashrur.
Yes.
He has written what Nazrul has said about world literature.
Yes, I mean,
There's
yes, but
nothing
you
to
see,
disagree
I mean,
with or anything.
okay, fine.
It's
So
there.
her point was that, can you please tell us more about it? That is, Nazrul's idea of world literature is that it's not about literature translated, but literature created by serious writers who believe in plurality, heritage, and peace. Most probably a combination of Sopan Bihari and Mati Dulali. He wondered if the speaker wants to talk more about it.
No.
Okay, fine.
And that's got
Then,
nothing to do with what I said.
it's fine. And there is one from Ahmed Hasanuzaman.
দেখা যাচ্ছে না কিছু কেন?
Madam, it's the last question. You can see it and check.
No,
I can read it out. But
please.
I think he offered a discussion between the speaker and Professor Farkul Alam. But yeah, as I see that Professor Farkul Alam is not available right now. Okay, he said that since Professor Farkul Alam translated Nazrul's Bidrohi, so does he have any take on the issues of untranslatability of Nazrul? She didn't know that Rabindranath issued is Nazrul. Okay, fine. I mean, it's about the Kuhn and Albert's element. That is, there is some controversies relating to it. Okay. These are something that we found in the chat box. Yes, now the floor is open. If we have any question, any kind of clarification or any observation, we can do it. Okay, there is one from Subroto Khan. He said, now I am curious to know a little bit about the usage of I in the poem The Rebel of Kazi Nazrul Islam. This is less about translation, more about if you have any say about the use of I in the poem The Rebel.
No, I don't actually understand the question. I mean, what should I say?
I would like to thank Professor Chanda for this discussion about plurality, intranslatability, and the ethics of translation. Now I'm curious to know a little bit about the usage of I in the poem The Rebel of Kazi Nazrul Islam. But I understand that it is more a literary question rather than about translation.
Is he here? Is he here?
Protokhan, are you there? I mean, can you just clarify your question? Yes. Shubhata, are you there? Do you hear us? Okay.
Oh, there is more here by somebody else regarding NUV.
Yes. Suraya Afrin. He said, I have understood that you proposed a solution in translating Bidrohi to address the problem of intranslatability, to translate the signification rather than naming the exact terms. But can we ignore the possibility that probably Nazrul wrote the way he did to preserve the literariness and defamiliarization, considering his readers, mostly Bengalis? Does concentrating only in the signification process risk the signifiers? I mean, probably put the signifiers at risk. Also, why not using the African writers' methods like Ngugi to engage the readers to know the text's culture by just using the exact terms? I mean, she proposes that let the words remain as they are and let the readers find out what they mean. So what do you think about it?
Many things, actually. First and foremost, there is no single rule for anything. That's to start with. The second thing is, like I said, that's one of the reasons why I said that. My main attempt was to maintain the rhyme scheme. Otherwise, you are not translating Nazrul's poetry. You can write paragraphs for each of them because the allusions are innumerable and the resonances also are innumerable. So there, if you said Shiva, it would mean nothing to the reader. You would have to put all of those, what I used over there, in footnotes. Here you can put Shiva in footnotes. You are still in the same place. You have not moved very far. And significations are untranslatable anyway. And that's exactly the point I was trying to make, that you cannot translate the signification. This has an added disadvantage that Shiva is one word. Pinak Panir Domoru Trishul is 3 words, you know, with a particular resonance. So if you're translating poetry and it is possible, then, I mean, I do not believe that there is one rule to translate everything in the world. I also am aware that Ngugi's politics, as far as the use of language is concerned, is something on which my entire understanding of translation is based. Ngugi's politics and আমার মাস্টারমশাই মানবেন্দ্রনাথ বন্দ্যোপাধ্যায়, that's the position that I'm coming from. And as far as practice is concerned, I agree with everything that you have said, signification, etc., all of that. But I still maintain that it depends on the text. And that is the point of the ethics. What are you trying to convey is rooted in how you are doing it. So you may try and engage the reader to know the culture. Here too, the reader is being engaged to know the culture. It's just that we are using 2 different methods. And the reason why we are using these 2 different methods is here, as I said, I wanted to preserve the rhythm of the thing. And sacrificing the rhythm and using a proper noun, I think would have been detrimental to the translation. So here the proper noun anyway has not been used by the writer. So I have also not used it. The writer has focused on what the proper noun does, that is what that name, the person or the god of that name, what he is supposed to do. An Indian reader or a South Asian reader may be able to understand without a footnote even. Certainly, as you say, the Bengali reader does not require a footnote. And I'd like to point out that perhaps the Bengali reader, because Nazrul is also a Bengali reader, so perhaps the Bengali reader does not require a footnote regardless of her religion. That is something which I think is true. I'd like to believe that. I would also like to believe that if a Bengali reader is able to decipher that reference, it is not necessary that she is Hindu. I mean, that is the plurality that we live with. So.
Yes, thank you. There are some questions. Let me summarize one of it. The question is in the question answer session chat, and that is if Nazrul remains many of his words because of its plurality, because of their plurality remain untranslatable. So how to reach the bigger audience, larger audience? Do you have any suggestion or what strategies? I mean, you talked about it. I mean, it's a kind of summarizing what you said. That is.
No, I don't, like I'm saying, I don't have any particular strategy. Now, I have translated, if you have read Dhorai Chorit Manosh in Bangla, then you will know that there are about 3 registers over there. There is Bengali, there is the language of Purnia, where the text is located. There is, of course, the distorted English, and 2 or 3 local languages apart from Hindi, which is the language of Purnia, that come into that text. And the writer also gives footnotes for the Bengali reader. So that I have translated into one English text, which is available from Sahitya Academy. I'm just saying this to point to one fact, that there is no single rule for anything. What you are translating is literature. So there is no single rule for to understand literature. Similarly, there is no single rule to translate literature either. These are things that we need to keep in mind when we are reading the text. Our attitude to the text, the way we engage with the text, if we keep these things in mind, only then will they come across in the translation. Or if we are not aware of it in the original, obviously it will not come across in the translation. If we have some kind of an imposition upon the original, like that Khun episode, that these words are not Bangla, that immediately betrays your position about language and about plurality, about difference. So I'm not suggesting any, sort of foolproof, paradigmatic, one and only breakthrough Newtonian or Galilean strategy to translate. No, I'm saying just the opposite. I'm saying that because translation is a willing activity, it depends on how you will the other. It depends on what is your approach to the other. And that depends on what kind of a person you are. There's
Okay.
nothing more or less about that.
Yes. Okay. There is a question that may not be completely related to the presentation, but if you want to make any one or two sentence observation, it is from Tania Sharmin, that is, should we give Nobel Prize in Literature based on translation? So would you like to make any comment on it?
No, I'm sorry, I have no comment on this.
Okay. Then Subrata Khan somehow elaborates his point. He says that this poem gives a larger area to think of I, which represents the spirit of socialist worker or a person who is seeking for independence, or it represents who are against the present system. And we say that I is a self or a collective one. I mean, very much like maybe that Whitman's myself. Yeah, so would you like to make any comment, or we will just...
No, I mean, I don't see a sort of a binary opposition between the collective self and no. I don't think either one is possible without the other. So it is a dialectic, basically. And there is no single, as far as I can see, there is no single I there. It is a positional I. I think that's the point. That the entire gamut of what you rebel against, or rather what the speaker in the poem rebels against, or what is worthy of rebellion, all of that is contained in the I. Not at once. I'm not saying that there's an absolute I, but I mean, in poetry, and especially I think again that's an area that we don't never talk about. In poetry and in modernist poetry, there is rarely a stable I. I mean, that is one of the bases of modernism, that psychoanalysis begins I, that there is one single seamless I. Whether psychoanalysis and psychology and Freud are, I mean, right or wrong is a different issue altogether. I mean, Wittgenstein calls him a hermeneutic. It's a way of understanding, is what he says. But it's a way of showing that the mind has many layers. The personality, I think I said that once in one little passing remark, that identity, to reduce identity to any one aspect is a dangerous thing. We are seeing the effects of it. We are living in the middle of the effects of the reduction of, I won't say a plural, but a dialectical identity into something solid, which is inevitably some majoritarian rightist position. I think there is another question regarding, regarding whether Srishti Shukher Ullashe can really be translated.
Yes.
The essay that I quoted by Said, but it's not in the same essay. In another essay by Said, in fact, by the same person, the incommensurability essay that I quoted from. The same person, has written another essay where he says that to translate is to know that you will fail to translate. I interpret that as saying that there can be multiple translations. And translation is literature. The success of a translation is dependent upon the reader. So whether I'm in full sympathy with your difficulty, can there really be a translation? I'm saying there can never really be a translation. There can be translations, that there can be.
Okay, so
Just one second, there's more here.
sure.
I think I should, I think I
Sure.
should send the questioner the entire poem. The whole of Ognibina has been translated. I've been involved in that. And I've translated the whole of Bidrohi, which I'm sorry I cannot share with you now until and unless it is published, because obviously it has been commissioned by someone else, so there are copyright issues. So the entire translation, I assure you, will be available, then you can judge it.
Okay, so I think we should take our event into disclosure.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, so this brings us to the close of our today's presentation session, and the very formality of Thanksgiving is there. So of course, we would like to thank first our speaker, Professor Ipshita Chanda, for investing and giving her time to make this presentation for all of us. I would like to thank the Department of English, all the members of the seminar committee for making it happen, particularly the chair of the department and Professor Dr. Saniyat Sattar, who took care of all those technical formalities, and Ibrahim Khan from BDRN, who has been taking care of all these technical formalities. Of course, I would like to thank everyone in the audience for their presence and questions and questions after questions and observations after observations that somehow made the session quite exciting and interactive. So thank you everyone for being here, and thanks again Professor Ipshita Chanda for making it happen. And this was really exciting, and we would like to hear you again, maybe sometime in future online. Thanks to Corona that somehow has made it possible that we are forced or mobilized to go online, and therefore we do not have to cross geographical borders by passport. It is only by password that we can visit and reach each other. With this, we are taking this session into its closure. We will be listening to another scholar from India in the next week. And very interesting, it's also about translation next Sunday. Till then, let us stay safe and sane, and let's reach each other and enrich each other. Thank you, everyone, for your presence.